At just 16 years old, Emma was no stranger to being overlooked. She had been working part-time at her uncle's auto repair shop for over a year now, doing odd jobs like sweeping floors, organizing tools, and occasionally fetching coffee for the mechanics. Most of the crew treated her as little more than a helper, someone who didn't really belong in their world of grease-stained hands and roaring engines. But Emma didn't mind too much. She knew she wasn't there to make friends. She was there to learn. The shop wasn't glamorous by any means. It sat on the edge of town, surrounded by fields that stretched endlessly under the wide open sky. Inside, the air always smelled of oil and metal, with faint echoes of clanging wrenches and revving engines filling the space. Despite its rough exterior, it felt like home to Emma. Her late father used to work here before he passed away, and every time she walked through the doors, she could almost hear his voice guiding her, encouraging her. One sunny afternoon, the usual hum of activity in the shop came to an abrupt halt when a dusty pickup truck pulled into the driveway. Out stepped a group of men wearing hard hats and carrying clipboards. They were from a construction company, and strapped to the back of their truck was an ancient bulldozer. The machine looked like it hadn't moved in decades. Its paint was faded, rust covered most of its surface, and weeds seemed to be growing out of cracks in its frame. "This thing hasn't run in years," said one of the men, pointing at the bulldozer. "We've tried everything, but nothing works. Thought maybe you guys could take a crack at it." Emma watched curiously as the boss of the crew, Mr. Harris, strolled over to inspect the machine. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a booming voice that commanded attention wherever he went. Everyone respected him, or at least feared him, but Emma found him intimidating. His sharp eyes scanned the bulldozer, taking in every detail before he let out a low whistle. "Well, this is going to be interesting," Mr. Harris muttered, scratching his chin. Then, without warning, he turned toward the gathered workers and raised his voice. "All right, listen up. Who wants to give this baby a shot?" For a moment, nobody spoke. The mechanics exchanged uneasy glances, each silently hoping someone else would volunteer. Fixing such an old piece of equipment was no small task. It required skill, patience, and a whole lot of luck. And judging by the state of the bulldozer, even those things might not be enough. Seeing the hesitation among his team, Mr. Harris smirked. "Come on, don't tell me none of you can handle it." His gaze swept across the room until it landed on Emma, who was standing quietly near the tool rack. A sly grin spread across his face. "Hey, kid," he called out, beckoning her closer. "Why don't you give it a try? What do you have to lose?" Emma froze. Had he really just asked her, a 16-year-old girl, to fix something that seasoned professionals couldn't? She glanced around nervously, noticing how all eyes were suddenly on her. Some of the workers chuckled, clearly amused by the absurdity of the situation. Others simply stared, waiting to see what she would do next. Her uncle, who owned the shop, stepped forward cautiously. "Mr. Harris, are you sure about this?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. "Emma's still learning. Maybe we should let one of the experienced guys take a look first." But Mr. Harris waved him off dismissively. "Oh, come on, let the kid try. Worst case scenario, she fails like the rest of us. Best case scenario." He trailed off dramatically, leaving the sentence unfinished. Turning back to Emma, he added, "So, what do you say, kid? Up for the challenge?" Emma swallowed hard. She wanted to protest, to explain that she wasn't qualified for this kind of job. But deep down, another part of her, the part that remembered her father teaching her how to change a tire or tighten a bolt, felt a spark of determination ignite within her. Maybe she couldn't fix the bulldozer, but she owed it to herself to at least try. Taking a deep breath, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "I'll give it a shot." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Some laughed softly, convinced they were about to witness yet another failure. Others leaned in closer, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. Even Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow, seemingly surprised by her willingness to accept the dare. As Emma approached the bulldozer, she reminded herself why she was doing this. This wasn't just about proving herself to a group of skeptical adults. It was about honoring her father's memory. He had always believed in her, even when others doubted her abilities. Now, standing in front of this monstrous machine, she felt his presence beside her, whispering words of encouragement. With trembling hands, she reached out and touched the cold, rusted metal of the bulldozer. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it must have been like when the engine last roared to life. Decades ago. Then, pushing aside her nerves, she got to work. Little did anyone know this shy teenager harbored a secret that would soon leave them all speechless. Emma stood in front of the bulldozer, her heart pounding like a drum. The weight of everyone's eyes on her was almost suffocating, but she refused to let it show. She took another deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't just about fixing a machine, it was about proving something, not just to Mr. Harris or the crew, but to herself. She reminded herself that she had spent countless hours learning everything she could about engines, even if no one else knew it. Her late father had been her first teacher. From the time she was a little girl, he would bring her to the shop after school and let her watch as he worked. At first, she mostly sat on a stool, swinging her legs back and forth while he explained what he was doing. But as she grew older, he started teaching her the basics: how to identify different parts of an engine, how to use tools safely, and most importantly, how to listen. An engine will tell you what's wrong, he used to say with a smile. You just have to know how to hear it. After her father passed away, Emma found solace in those lessons. On quiet nights when she couldn't sleep, she would sit at the kitchen table with his old repair manuals, flipping through pages filled with diagrams and notes written in his neat handwriting. Sometimes she'd pull up videos on her phone, watching tutorials from mechanics who shared her passion for understanding how things worked. Over time, she began piecing together knowledge that went far beyond what anyone expected from someone her age. But despite all her studying, Emma had never worked on anything as big or complicated as a bulldozer. Still, she trusted her instincts. Every engine operated on similar principles, whether it powered a car, a motorcycle, or a massive piece of construction equipment. If she could figure out where the problem lay, there was a chance she could fix. The crowd around her grew restless, shifting their weight from foot to foot as they waited to see what she would do next. Some whispered among themselves, clearly skeptical that this teenager could succeed where experienced professionals had failed. Others leaned forward slightly, curious to see if she might surprise them. Emma tuned them out, focusing instead on the task ahead. She started by popping open the hood, revealing the tangled mess of wires, hoses, and components inside. The engine looked worse up close than it had from afar. Layers of dirt and grime coated every surface, making it difficult to see anything clearly. Emma grabbed a rag from her pocket and began wiping away the dust, revealing bits of metal beneath. As she worked, she noticed small details: a cracked hose here, a loose bolt there, that others might have missed. Next, she checked the fuel system. One of the most common reasons engines failed to start was a lack of fuel reaching the combustion chamber. Using a flashlight, she traced the fuel lines carefully, looking for blockages or leaks. To her relief, they seemed intact, though she made a mental note to clean them later. Satisfied that fuel wasn't the issue, she moved on to the spark plugs. Removing the spark plugs required precision, and Emma worked slowly, double-checking each step before moving on to the next. When she finally pulled them out, she held them up to the light, examining them closely. Sure enough, they were worn down and covered in carbon deposits. Replacing them wouldn't be enough, though. They were a symptom of a larger problem, not the root cause itself. As she continued inspecting the engine, Emma's mind raced through everything she had learned. She thought about compression tests, timing belts, and electrical connections, trying to pinpoint what might be preventing the bulldozer from starting. Then, something caught her eye: a tiny valve near the carburetor that looked slightly misaligned. It was such a small detail that it would have been easy to overlook. But Emma's sharp eyes didn't miss it. Her fingers hovered over the valve as memories flooded back. Her father had once told her a story about a similar issue he'd encountered years ago. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference, he had said. At the time, she hadn't fully understood what he meant, but now it clicked. That valve, if it wasn't properly aligned, it could disrupt the entire fuel-air mixture, causing the engine to stall. Emma reached for her wrench, her hands steady despite the pressure building around her. She adjusted the valve ever so slightly, ensuring it was perfectly aligned. Then she reconnected the spark plugs and double-checked the rest of the engine to make sure nothing else was amiss. By the time she finished, sweat dripped down her forehead, and her arms ached from leaning over the bulky machine. But she felt confident that she had done everything she could. Stepping back, she surveyed her work. The bulldozer still looked old and battered, but she hoped she had given its engine a fighting chance. Taking a moment to compose herself, she climbed into the driver's seat. The leather was cracked and stiff beneath her fingers as she gripped the steering wheel. For a moment, she closed her eyes, imagining her father standing beside her, nodding approvingly. Then, with a deep breath, she turned the key. The silence that followed was deafening. For a split second, Emma feared she had failed. But then, with a sputter and a groan, the engine roared to life. Thick clouds of black smoke billowed from the exhaust pipe as the bulldozer shuddered violently, settling into a steady rumble. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with the force of it, and the air filled with the unmistakable smell of burning oil. Gasps erupted from the crowd. No one moved. They simply stared, wide-eyed and slack-jawed, as the impossible unfolded before them. Even Mr. Harris, who had dared her to try in the first place, looked utterly stunned. His arms, which had been crossed tightly over his chest, fell limply to his sides. Emma climbed down from the bulldozer, her knees trembling slightly. She wiped her hands on her jeans, leaving streaks of grease behind, and glanced around at the faces surrounding her. Some were smiling in disbelief while others clapped enthusiastically. A few even shook their heads, muttering words like unbelievable and incredible. One of the older mechanics stepped forward, extending a calloused hand. "Kid, you've got some serious talent," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Part of her wanted to keep her late-night study sessions and childhood lessons private, but another part knew it was time to share her story. Taking a deep breath, she met his gaze and began to speak. "When I was younger, my dad taught me a lot about engines," she explained softly. "He always believed I could do anything if I put my mind to it. After he passed away, I kept learning, because it felt like a way to stay connected to him." Her voice wavered slightly and she blinked back tears. "I guess today was kind of my way of honoring him." The mechanic nodded slowly, his expression softening. "Well, your dad must have been one heck of a teacher," he said, patting her shoulder. "And you're one heck of a student." The comment brought a small smile to Emma's face, but it was the reaction from the rest of the crew that truly touched her. Slowly, one by one, they began to applaud. Not the sarcastic, mocking applause she had expected earlier, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Even Mr. Harris joined in, though his usual bravado seemed to have melted away. For the first time since she started working at the shop, Emma felt like she truly belonged. The moment Emma turned the key and heard the bulldozer's engine roar to life, it felt like time froze. The ground vibrated beneath their feet as the machine exhaled thick clouds of black smoke, shaking off decades of dormancy. For a split second, no one moved or spoke. The silence was deafening, broken only by the steady rumble of the engine, a sound so unexpected that it left everyone staring in stunned disbelief. Emma sat frozen in the driver's seat, her hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her heart raced faster than the pistons firing inside the engine. She had done it. Against all odds, she had brought a dead machine back to life. But instead of feeling triumphant, she felt overwhelmed. The weight of what she had just accomplished hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. Then, reality came crashing back. Someone in the crowd let out a low whistle, followed by an audible gasp. Another person muttered, "No way," under their breath. Slowly, the murmurs grew louder, spreading through the group like wildfire. A few people clapped hesitantly at first, unsure whether they were witnessing brilliance or sheer luck. But as the engine continued to run smoothly, the applause became more confident, building into a crescendo of cheers and whistles. Emma climbed down from the bulldozer, her legs wobbling slightly. The grease-streaked rag she had used earlier hung loosely in her hand, and her jeans were smudged with dirt. But none of that mattered now. As she stepped onto solid ground, she looked around at the faces surrounding her. Some were smiling in awe. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. Even Mr. Harris, who had dared her to try in the first place, seemed utterly speechless. "Well, I'll be damned," one of the older mechanics said, breaking the spell. He took off his cap and scratched his head, clearly struggling to process what he had just seen. "Kid, you've got some serious guts and skill to pull that off." Emma smiled shyly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It wasn't just me," she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "I just figured out what needed fixing." "Figured it out?" Another worker chimed in, chuckling. "Most of us couldn't even figure out where to start. You didn't just fix it. You solved a problem we'd been scratching our heads over for weeks." The compliment made Emma blush, but it also filled her with pride. She glanced toward her uncle, who stood near the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed and a proud grin plastered across his face. His eyes sparkled with admiration, and he gave her a subtle nod of approval. Seeing that look on his face meant the world to her. It was validation not just as a mechanic but as someone who belonged in this world of engines and machines. But the reactions weren't limited to praise. Questions began to fly from every direction. "How did you know what to do? Where'd you learn all that? Are you sure you're only 16? Emma tried to answer as best she could, though the barrage of curiosity was overwhelming. Each question reminded her of how unusual her situation was, how rare it was for someone her age to possess such knowledge, especially in front of a group of seasoned professionals. One of the younger workers pushed his way through the crowd, holding out a hand. "Seriously, that was insane," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "You've got to teach me some of your tricks." Emma laughed nervously, shaking his hand. "It's not really about tricks," she explained. "It's about understanding how things work. Once you break it down, it's not as complicated as it seems." Her words resonated with the group, sparking nods of agreement. Many of them had spent years learning their trade through trial and error, relying on instinct and experience. To see someone so young approach the same problems with logic and precision was both humbling and inspiring. As the initial shock wore off, the atmosphere shifted. What had started as a dare, a joke really, had transformed into something much bigger. The crew gathered closer, eager to hear more about how Emma had managed to succeed where they had failed. They bombarded her with questions about specific parts of the engine, asking her to explain her thought process step by step. Emma did her best to oblige, pointing out details like the misaligned valve and worn-out spark plugs. She described how each component played a role in the overall function of the engine, emphasizing the importance of patience and attention to detail. Even Mr. Harris, who had initially issued the challenge with a smirk, seemed genuinely impressed. He stepped forward, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. All right, he said, raising his hands to quiet the chatter. "Let's give the kid some space, huh? She's earned it." His tone was lighter now, almost apologetic. Gone was the sarcastic edge from earlier. In its place was a newfound respect. He turned to Emma, meeting her gaze directly. "You've got talent, kid. Real talent. And guts, too. Not many people would take on a challenge like this, especially when everyone's watching." Emma nodded, feeling a mix of relief and accomplishment. "Thank you," she said simply, unsure of what else to add. Mr. Harris studied her for a moment longer before speaking again. "Listen, I'm not gonna lie. I didn't expect you to actually pull it off. But you proved me wrong, and that takes guts, so good job." With that, he extended his hand. Emma hesitated for a brief second before reaching out to shake it. His grip was firm, and his expression softened further. It was clear that he meant what he said, and that acknowledgement from him carried significant weight. After all, earning the respect of someone like Mr. Harris wasn't easy. It required proving yourself beyond any doubt. As the excitement began to settle, the crew dispersed, returning to their respective tasks. But the energy in the shop had changed. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie, a shared appreciation for what Emma had achieved. Conversations buzzed around her, with snippets of praise floating through the air. "Did you see how she adjusted that valve? She's got instincts like a pro. We might have ourselves a future boss right here." Emma couldn't help but smile as she listened. For the first time since she started working at the shop, she felt truly seen, not as a teenager doing odd jobs, but as someone capable of making a real contribution. The experience had been nerve-wracking, exhilarating, and deeply rewarding all at once. And yet she knew this was only the beginning. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma found herself sitting alone in the shop. The bulldozer still sat in the corner, its engine silent once more after being shut down for the day. She stared at it, reflecting on everything that had happened. Bringing that machine back to life had been a turning point, not just for her reputation among the crew, but for her own confidence as well. She thought about her father often during moments like these. Though he wasn't physically present to witness her triumph, she knew he would have been proud. Every lesson he had taught her, every story he had shared, had led her to this moment. Fixing the bulldozer hadn't just been about proving herself to others. It had been about honoring the legacy he had left behind. As she stood up to leave, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. This victory wasn't the end of her journey. It was the start of something greater. She had shown the crew and herself that she was capable of achieving the impossible. And with that realization burning brightly within her, she walked out of the shop, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The applause and cheers from the crew had died down, but the energy in the shop remained electric. Emma stood near the bulldozer, still catching her breath after the whirlwind of attention she had received. The men who moments ago had doubted her abilities now surrounded her, asking questions, offering congratulations and sharing stories of their own struggles with stubborn engines. It was as if a barrier had been broken, not just between Emma and the crew, but within themselves as well. One of the older mechanics, a grizzled man named Joe with grease-streaked overalls and a perpetual scowl, stepped forward. He had been among the most skeptical earlier, muttering under his breath about how kids these days didn't know the first thing about hard work. But now, his expression softened, and he extended a calloused hand toward Emma. "You've got guts, kid," Joe said, his voice gravelly but warm. "And talent. Real talent. Not many people, let alone someone your age, could have pulled that off." Emma shook his hand, feeling a surge of pride. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the lump forming in her throat. She wanted to say more, to explain where her knowledge came from, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, hoping her gratitude showed in her eyes. Joe wasn't done yet. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only Emma could hear. "You remind me of someone," he admitted. "My daughter. She's about your age, always surprising me with what she can do when I least expect it." He paused, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "Anyway, good job today." Emma smiled, touched by the unexpected vulnerability in his words. It was clear that this moment meant something to him too, not just because of what she had accomplished, but because it reminded him of someone important in his life. That connection made the victory feel even sweeter. As the crowd began to thin out, Mr. Harris approached Emma once again. This time there was no trace of sarcasm or mockery in his demeanor. His usual commanding presence seemed tempered, replaced by genuine curiosity. "All right, kid," he said, crossing his arms loosely over his chest. "I gotta ask, you didn't just stumble into this, did you? There's no way you figured all that out on the fly?" Emma hesitated for a moment, unsure how much to reveal. She glanced around at the remaining workers, some of whom were still lingering nearby, eager to hear her answer. Taking a deep breath, she decided it was time to share her story, the truth behind her skill and determination. "I didn't figure it out overnight," she began, her voice soft but steady. I've been learning about engines for years. My dad, he taught me everything I know. Her gaze dropped briefly to the ground as memories flooded back. He used to bring me here when I was little. He'd let me watch while he worked, explaining what he was doing step by step. As I got older, he started teaching me the basics, how to use tools, how to identify problems, how to fix them. She paused, swallowing hard. Talking about her father was never easy, but today felt different. Today, it felt like he was right there with her, cheering her on. When he passed away, she continued, her voice trembling slightly, I kept learning. I read his old repair manuals, watched videos online, stayed up late trying to understand how things worked. I guess it was my way of staying close to him, you know? The room fell silent. Even the faint hum of machinery in the background seemed to fade away as everyone absorbed her words. For many of the men, this revelation hit home in ways they hadn't anticipated. They understood loss. They understood the pain of losing someone who shaped their lives. And they understood the power of carrying on their legacy. One of the younger workers, a lanky guy named Mike, spoke up first. That's wow, he said, shaking his head in amazement. Most people would have given up after losing someone like that, but you kept going. You turned it into something amazing. Emma nodded, blinking back tears. He always believed in me, she said softly, even when other people didn't. He told me I could do anything if I put my mind to it, so I guess I wanted to prove him right. Her words resonated deeply with the group. Some of the men exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. Others looked down at their boots, lost in their own reflections. Even Mr. Harris, who rarely showed emotion beyond confidence and authority, appeared visibly moved. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Well, kid, he said, his tone unusually gentle. You've definitely proven something today, not just to us, but to yourself. Your dad would be damn proud of you. Emma's heart swelled at his words. Hearing them from someone like Mr. Harris, a man known for his tough exterior and high standards, meant more than she could express. She managed a small smile, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Thanks, she whispered. That means a lot. The conversation shifted naturally after that, transitioning from awe and admiration to practical matters. Several of the workers asked Emma to walk them through her process again, explaining how she had diagnosed the problem and made the necessary repairs. She obliged, pointing out specific components and describing the logic behind each decision. Her explanations were clear and concise, earning nods of approval from even the most seasoned mechanics. See, this is why we need fresh perspectives, one of the older guys remarked, gesturing toward Emma. Sometimes, we get stuck in our ways thinking we've tried everything, but then someone comes along and shows us a new way of looking at things. Emma blushed at the compliment, shrugging modestly. It's not really about being new or different, she said. It's about paying attention to the details. Engines are complicated, sure, but they're also predictable if you take the time to understand them. Her humility only added to the crew's admiration. Here was a 16-year-old girl who had not only fixed a machine none of them could start, but had also done so with grace and wisdom far beyond her years. By the end of the evening, it was clear that Emma had earned their respect, and more importantly, their trust. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the shop floor, the mood grew reflective. The day's events had left an indelible mark on everyone present. For Emma, it was a turning point, a moment of validation that reinforced her passion and dedication. For the crew, it was a reminder of why they loved what they did. The thrill of solving problems, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life, and the bonds forged through shared challenges. Before leaving for the night, Mr. Harris pulled Emma aside. Listen, he said, his voice low and serious. What you did today, it doesn't happen every day. You've got potential, kid. Real potential, don't waste it. Emma met his gaze, feeling a mix of determination and gratitude. I won't, she promised. I'm not planning to stop anytime soon. With those words, She gathered her things and headed for the door. As she stepped outside, the cool evening air greeted her, carrying with it a sense of possibility. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. She knew that. But tonight, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. Her father's lessons had guided her this far, and she intended to honor his memory by continuing to push herself, to learn and to grow. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt truly unstoppable. The next morning, Emma arrived at the shop earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the fields surrounding the building. She walked through the open garage doors, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. The bulldozer still sat in its corner, silent but no longer forgotten. It served as a reminder of what she had accomplished, a testament to her hard work, determination, and the lessons passed down from her father. As the day unfolded, word of Emma's feat spread like wildfire throughout the town. Customers who visited the shop couldn't help but ask about the kid who fixed the impossible bulldozer. Some came out of curiosity, others out of admiration, but all left impressed by the young mechanic with grease-streaked hands and a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. Her uncle, proud of his niece's growing reputation, started assigning her more challenging tasks, knowing she could handle them. And slowly but surely, Emma began to carve out a place for herself, not as an assistant or a helper, but as a skilled mechanic in her own right. One afternoon, a man walked into the shop, his face etched with worry. He introduced himself as Tom, a local farmer whose tractor had broken down during planting season. "I've been to 3 different shops already," he explained, running a hand through his graying hair. "No one can figure out what's wrong with it. I heard about you from Harris. He said you might be able to take a look." Emma felt a flicker of nervousness at being singled out, especially since Mr. Harris had recommended her directly. But she pushed those feelings aside, reminding herself of why she was here. "Sure," she said with a small smile. "Let me see what I can do." Tom led her to his truck, where the tractor sat on a trailer covered in mud and dust. It looked weary, much like its owner. Emma climbed onto the seat, turning the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered weakly before falling silent. She popped, opened the hood, diving into the familiar routine of inspection. Within an hour, she had identified the issue, a clogged fuel injector. After cleaning it thoroughly and replacing a worn-out gasket, she turned the key again. This time, the tractor roared to life, steady and strong. Tom's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're kidding me," he muttered, shaking his head. "How did you— Never mind, just— Thank you. You saved my crop this year." Emma beamed, feeling a rush of satisfaction. Helping people solve their problems wasn't just rewarding. It was exactly why she loved working on engines. Each repair brought her closer to mastering her craft and living up to her father's legacy. Over the following weeks, Emma's reputation continued to grow. More customers specifically requested her services, trusting her instincts and skill. Mechanics from neighboring towns even stopped by to meet her, eager to learn from the teenager who had tamed the unfixable bulldozer. At first, Emma felt intimidated by the attention, but she soon realized it wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves. Her presence also began to change the dynamic within the crew. Younger workers looked up to her, seeing her as proof that age didn't define ability. Older mechanics, once skeptical, now sought her advice when tackling particularly tricky repairs. Emma became a bridge between generations, fostering a sense of unity and mutual respect among the team. Even Joe, the gruff mechanic who had initially doubted her, started treating her like family. He often pulled her aside to share tips or tell stories about his own early days in the trade, passing along wisdom he had accumulated over decades. Mr. Harris, too, underwent a transformation. Gone was the dismissive attitude he had shown on the day of the bulldozer challenge. In its place was genuine appreciation, and perhaps a hint of guilt for underestimating her. One evening, as the crew was wrapping up for the day, he approached Emma with an envelope in hand. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Consider it a raise and a permanent position on the crew." Emma opened the envelope, her eyes widening at the numbers inside. It was more than she had ever imagined earning at her age. She looked up at Mr. Harris, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice filled with gratitude. "I won't let you down. I know you won't," he replied with a rare smile. "You've earned this, kid." With her newfound role came increased responsibility. Emma took it upon herself to mentor younger workers, teaching them not only technical skills, but also the mindset needed to succeed in the field. She encouraged them to ask questions, experiment, and never stop learning. Her favorite piece of advice was one her father had given her. "Every engine tells a story. Listen carefully, and it will guide you." Her passion for teaching extended beyond the shop. On weekends, she volunteered at a community center, leading workshops for kids interested in mechanics. She showed them how to use tools safely, explained the basics of engine function, and shared anecdotes about her journey. Many of the children reminded her of herself at their age, curious, eager, and full of potential. Seeing their faces light up as they connected wires or tightened bolts filled her with joy and purpose. Months turned into years, and Emma grew into her role as both a mechanic and a leader. The shop thrived under her influence, becoming known not just for its expertise, but also for its welcoming atmosphere. Customers trusted the crew implicitly, knowing they would receive honest assessments and top-notch service. New hires looked to Emma as a role model, inspired by her dedication and humility. Despite her success, Emma remained grounded. She knew none of it would have been possible without her father's guidance, or the challenges that had pushed her to prove herself. Every time she heard the rumble of a freshly repaired engine, she smiled, imagining him standing beside her, nodding approvingly. On quieter days, she would sit alone in the shop, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the scent of oil and metal. She'd think about how far she had come, from a shy teenager sweeping floors to a respected mechanic leading a team of professionals. And though she missed her father deeply, she found comfort in knowing that his legacy lived on through her. Emma's story became a symbol of perseverance and possibility. People talked about her not just because of what she had achieved, but because of how she had done it, with heart, determination, and an unwavering belief in herself. For Emma, every engine she fixed was more than just a machine. It was a reminder that even the most broken things could find new life with care and effort. And so, as the years rolled on, Emma continued to honor her father's memory, one repair at a time.